Hey guys, Kev here, and I am ready to do my full review on the CKF Satori 2.0. This is the Custom Knife Factory Satori 2.0. This is a Peter Rossetti design, integral frame lock here. Very cool knife, on the higher end of knives, at least in my collection. I think this is the most expensive. At least this is the most expensive retail knife. I do have an 80/20. I did pay more for that, but I bought them both secondary. So this one does go for 640 new, but I picked it up for 480 on the secondary. And in case you're curious, CKF, or Custom Knife Factory, mainly sells their knives through their own website, and then they're connected with this site called From Russia with Knives. Pretty cool name there, since I'm a James Bond fan. But you can go to FromRussiaWithKnives.com, and whenever CKF does drop a batch, that's where you can get it. And it is kind of random how CKF does it. I don't follow them very closely, so I don't know what their real method is, but I've seen them post on Instagram that this knife is available now, and then they're on From Russia with Knives, but they don't really have a bunch of stock of different knives on that website. They have some that haven't sold, but these kind of very popular ones that they drop batches of, they go really fast, and then that's it for a while, if they even make more. This one here is number 353. I don't know how many they made, and if they're going to do another run or not. You can see the N390 marking here on the back. I picked this up off of Blade Forums, off a great guy, so I do appreciate him selling this to me. I mentioned before, when I bought this knife, I kind of spread the payments out over a couple days just to kind of ease the pain a little bit, because it's a lot of money. That's why I'm a proponent of payment methods like Sezzle or Afterpay, I think it's called, where you can pay over like 6 weeks and you pay in 4 payments. And it doesn't change what you pay. There's no interest or anything. It just basically lets you spread the payments out, but you get the knife right away. So if I see that option on a more expensive knife, I usually go for it nowadays. I don't know. It's a mental thing, but it's just easier for me to do it that way rather than drop a whole chunk right at once. But anyway, the CKF Satori 2.0, aesthetically here, this is a fantastic looking knife. I mean, I initially was not very intrigued by this when I saw it on Instagram and stuff, but then, of course, Jake from Bearded Gear got one, and I had to have one, because everything Jake gets, I have to get, right? That's kind of a joke we have, but it honestly does happen a lot. He has very good taste in knives, and it turns out to be very similar to mine, so it kind of works out. But a lot of times the question for me is, will it work left-handed? I can love a design all I want, but, Jake is right-handed and I'm left-handed, so depending on how it functions for me, I might have a different outcome with a knife than he does, even though we both think it's a great knife, objectively. But does it work for a lefty? That's usually the question, and that was a huge question mark with this knife because it's a thin-handled frame lock, and really, it could have been hit or miss. I absolutely love this knife, but it does have its issues for a lefty for sure, even for a righty. But kind of like the Chavez knives, I can overlook things when something is just this gorgeous. I absolutely adore the look of this knife. It has this ridiculously scary looking tanto on it with the recurve out to this really fine point. It has this compound grind with the hollow grind back here and the flat grind up here. Has this awesome looking spine right here with the jimping up here down into a mini poon spoon. And it has a pretty robust tip, you can see there. It's just fantastic. And in terms of cutting, this thing is actually a really good cutter because of that hollow grind. And then you have the flat up here as well. You have a more penetrating tip right here, and then you have your, what I call the package opening tip right here, that you can just drop in, make a slice, and not worry about cutting anything in the package. It has these blade stops here, which are interesting because they're not thumb studs, right? They're blade stops. But as a lefty, because I push out from the detent, I can use this as a thumb stud. But right-handed, because you're pushing that blade into the detent, it is much harder to do. I think it is possible. I'll try it. Ow. No. So you can't do it because you're pushing into the detent, right? But left-handed, you don't have that problem. So it kind of just shoots right out. You can also use the fuller here. You can use that to thumb flick it as well, left-handed. You can use the fuller as a middle flicking point, left-handed. So that's cool. And then obviously you have the flipper tab. So there's multiple deployment methods on this knife. Right-handed, you have the flipper tab. And then you have the fuller for middle finger flicking, right? I always have to give it a little bit of wrist almost with any method other than this thumb flick. And the flipper, obviously. So I guess what I'm saying is when I middle finger flick it, I have to give it a little bit of wrist. But I think I'm learning lately that I'm not the best at middle finger flicking. I seem to always get this finger in the way of things. If there's like a thumb stud or whatever, it kind of just gets in the way. And I don't get enough power behind my flick somehow. I don't know what it is, but it's tough for me. And I usually just have to give it a little bit of a wrist flick to get it all the way out that way. I never have a problem with the thumb flick or a flipper. But it's just that middle finger, sometimes I have a little bit of an issue getting enough gas on it. So, back to the knife. In terms of materials, again, we have M390 here on the blade and titanium. This is an integral frame lock, so that naturally adds some cost to the knife in terms of machining, and then in terms of what it costs. It goes both ways. And Peter Rossetti basically is known for having really crazy looking integrals. And this handle is just absolutely gorgeous. Just a really cool knife design overall. Has these two kind of holes at the bottom here. They kind of look like drain holes, but I'm pretty sure they're there for lanyard guys. So if you're a lanyard guy, you have something there for yourself. And I was talking about deployment methods, right? So the action on this knife is very interesting to me. So first off, the sounds it makes. So I just did my review on the Bombshell, Spyderco Bombshell, and that thing makes some amazing sounds when it opens. It just cracks out. And this knife is the complete opposite. The sound on this knife is very disappointing to me. And I don't know if that's because it's an integral. I'm guessing that's why. But I do have the Benchmade Anthem, and I actually have it right here. And that makes some really cool sounds. Listen up. So that sounds really cool. I don't know how that comes across, but it's mechanical sounding, and then when the blade bounces off, it kind of goes ting ting. Sounds really cool. This knife, it just kind of like subtly locks up, and then when it closes, it just kind of like sucks it in. It's just a very blah sounding knife. So, I don't know. That's a little disappointing. I like a knife that cracks out and then makes a cool sound when it retracts. This just sounds like a dull thud, and then it kind of vibrates through the integral. I don't know. Interesting. But sounds don't make or break a knife. They're just really nice to have cool sounds on your knife. So when you're sitting there on the couch flicking it, it really can annoy your wife. And we all love to do that, right? So yeah, the sounds are a little disappointing. The detent on this guy is relatively light as well. Let's see if I can shake it out. Trying not to hold the frame lock. So, yeah, it took a little bit of juice to get it out. But you can see with the flipper, it doesn't have a very great detent. I'm going to get it to the break point. And it literally just flops out, which is pretty disappointing. Especially since this seems to have been designed as a flipper, not as a knife to be middle finger flicked, which, it has the fuller there that works for that, but I'm not sure if it was designed that way. I could be wrong. If Peter Rosenti was going for that, maybe, but I don't think so. So you'd think the flipper would be a little better, right? But I think part of it is this is just a heavy blade, right? It's just a big old heavy blade, and then you have this minimal flipper tab. And you have pretty small bearings in there. I don't know if you can see those, but they're pretty small size bearings. So that all kind of just leads to a light detent. And honestly, though, normally that would bother me a lot more. I am a very picky stickler when it comes to detents. But I've just learned that you got to just flick this a little bit harder. You just got to give it a little light switch. Push button's not great on this guy. It works, but it's not great. But, if you really try to flick it out, it goes. And that's something I'm kind of working on personally, to not hold that against knives so much. But so the action is, I'm going to say the action, at least on the open, is good. And the reason I'm going to go from okay to good is because you have the option to middle finger flick, and in my case, left-handed thumb flick as well. So you have a lot of ways to open this knife. And if the detent were much stiffer, I wouldn't be able to do those things. So it is possible they were going for that, but I still doubt it. The closing action on this thing is ridiculous. Once you get past that detent, it is a guillotine. And it's not like a controlled close. It is a drop, right? This thing just drops close. I'm not going to move at all. It's amazing. But at the same time, I still am baffled that Custom Knife Factory knives and Riot knives a lot of times don't have detent ramps. I know Riot has them, but it doesn't fully solve the issue. But CKF doesn't have a detent ramp at all. So if you don't get past the detent, you're stuck. So you have to make sure it gets past. And when it does, it closes. But it's just interesting that something that retails for $640 doesn't have a detent ramp in it. But the closing action is awesome. I did notice when I first got this knife that it was even more drop shutty than this, if you can believe that. But after a day or so, I checked and I had a bit of play. Very tiny amount, but it was there. So I tightened it up, and it has just gotten better and better since I did that. Now it's almost back to dropping completely. But there's no play. So it's kind of wearing in a path. This was brand new. I bought it on the secondary, but it was brand new, so it hadn't been broken in yet. So I'm working on that. Closing action, great. Carry. This clip here is not deep carry. About this much of the knife sticks up, which is not bad. In this case, it's long enough of a knife for this much knife sticking out. I'm fine with that. It is right hand only, right? So as a lefty, and with this detent being relatively light, I try not to carry this in my front left pocket, so I carry it in my back left pocket. And that keeps the blade against the seam, and I can't have any issues with the blade coming out. I worry about it a little bit in my front left pocket. So if you're a lefty out there looking at this knife, keep that in mind. And if you're right-handed, the carry is really good on this knife. It's comfortable, goes in and out of pocket. Tension is fine, so no issues there really. What else? Cutting we've talked about. It slices really good. Ergonomics. So this is, this is one where I think it's going to come down to your hand. It's one, and it sucks to say that because of how expensive this is, but you really need to have it in hand to know. It has this cutout here for your index finger and then kind of a swell up for the rest, right? And I have a large glove size hand, large to XL, and it just fits me like an absolute glove. This knife could not be more comfortable. The only thing that would be more comfortable is if the jimping was kind of extended up to here maybe, because my thumb wants to go up here and not back here where the jimping is. So I'd prefer to have it up here. And then obviously I always would love a choil, but I understand why they didn't add a finger choil on this one, given that you already have kind of a shorter blade length. You're looking at, I think, 3.3 inches, and then, how much of that is blade length, I'm not sure. But if, they cut into here for a choil, it would be a little awkward. This edge right here to the tanto tip would only be like this long, and it just would be kind of silly. So I totally get why they didn't add a choil. And design-wise, it looks fantastic the way it is. So just an awesome, awesome knife. I absolutely adore this thing. I've contemplated selling it just to get more knives into the channel, just because of how expensive it is. But man, I posted it on Facebook one time because I'm trying to get I think it's Brian Brown Knives Jaeger M, the Riot made ones, and they look so good. And in that Facebook group, they have a buy, sell, trade post, right? And I put in there that I wanted a Jaeger M and was willing to trade my Satori 2.0. And after about 2 minutes, I deleted the comment because I couldn't do it. Even if I had been offered something, the Jaeger plus cash for this, I don't think I could have done it. So I deleted the comment almost immediately. And ironically, I think I changed the comment to include the Anthem, which is my other integral. I think I changed it to the Anthem instead of this. Because I think I would trade the Anthem for a Jaeger. But anyway, it's a different subject. But so I think I'm going to be hanging on to this for a while, guys. I do really, really love it. It's just hard to have knives this expensive in your collection when now with the channel, I barely carry my own knives. I'm always carrying a new knife that comes in. So, it's hard to justify keeping some of these expensive ones, knowing that they won't get a ton of pocket time. But it's also hard to let them go because this thing is just so gorgeous. So I think I'm going to finish this up here with value, guys, and whether I can recommend this knife. And in terms of value, I don't think this is worth $640, which is what they retailed for. You do have a titanium integral and everything, but $640, I mean, give me Vanex maybe on this, and a little, work in a little zirconium or something, and maybe it's worth $640. Even the blade finish here, this stonewash or bead blast, a full satin, like a hand rub satin maybe. I don't know if that goes with the design, but that maybe would have got it to $640. But just the way it is, I don't think it's worth $640. Obviously, a lot of people think it is because they sold out fast, you know. But if you look at secondary pricing, these usually go anywhere from $450 to $550. So, you know, the secondary market kind of figured out that this knife is more in that range. And I definitely say if you can pick one of these up for $500 or less on the secondary, I mean, I might creep that up to like $550 if you really want it and you have the money. I could definitely recommend this knife at, you know, let's say $550 and under, but closer to $500 would be my preference. So if you're looking for one and you find one for that price, I definitely think it's worth it. Now, for a lefty, this is where, you know, you're going to have to make this decision on your own. Obviously, you probably shouldn't take advice from me anyway. I'm the guy sitting in front of the camera ranting for 20 minutes about a knife. But if you're a lefty, it comes down to if you like the look of this knife and you don't mind certain things. Like, I kind of think of it like the Chavez knives. That knife is terrible for a left-handed person. It's pretty bad for a righty too, honestly. But it just is so cool that I don't care, and I bought it anyway. And I carry it, and I love it. And this is the same way. You know, it's not perfect for a lefty. Now, ergonomically for me, it is. It's fantastic. It carries pretty good as long as you don't put it in your front left pocket, unless you don't mind that, you know. But, you know, deployment-wise and stuff, you have the frame lock pressure issues. You know, I probably should have talked about that more. The middle finger flick as a lefty is pretty tough because you really have to keep your finger out of this frame lock. And then you got to get it in the groove, and you basically are just using momentum to flick it open, right? I'm not using my finger strength for that. I'm just kind of shoving the blade out and then whipping it open. You know, and then the thumb flick actually is probably the easiest way to open this knife. You know, you just put it behind the blade stop and shoot it, and then obviously the flipper tab works great. I probably use the flipper tab the most, the thumb flick the second most, and then rarely use the middle finger flick because if my hands are sweaty at all or wet or anything, I really can't have the dexterity to get the middle finger flick right. And it just doesn't honestly feel that good. Now, right-handed, you have the flipper tab, and then, you know, you have your middle finger flick, which for most people, if you know how to flick better than I do, you know, you'll be able to get this out. And I know Jake thinks it's a really fun knife to fidget with right-handed, and I trust his opinion. So, yeah, as a lefty, if you're fine with those things, go for it. As a righty, yeah, I think it's fantastic. You know, it is thin, so you got to keep that in mind. But again, that's all preference stuff. So that's kind of my thoughts on value and recommendations. But overall, this is just a really cool knife. It's just an interesting offering from CKF, or as Kyle would call it, CFK. And just, you know, great design from Peter Rosenti. And it really has put CKF on the map for me and made me want to keep an eye on what they're doing next and get more in their knives. So this is the CKF Satori 2.0, and it is a fantastic knife. I appreciate you guys listening to me rant and rave, and I hope you have a fantastic day. I will catch you later.